All right, so good morning. This is Jen Kitzmiller at the National Weather Service in Missoula, and we wanted to talk to you all about some of the details with this potentially historic winter storm that we have coming in here later this week, beginning tomorrow and then really continuing into the weekend and even into Monday, some lingering impacts. Um, so with that, this is something that is definitely very abnormal for this time of year. Here in Missoula, it's been 30 plus years since we've seen measurable snow in September. So we just wanted to give a little of the highlights of what exactly we're expecting. And this storm that's coming in, it's really in a series of phases. And so what we're considering the first phase is really going to encompass that Friday night into Saturday time frame. And this is going to be the period when we are expecting to begin to see some high elevation, heavy, wet snow, particularly along the Continental Divide and Marias Pass in particular. Looks like it could be really impacted by quite a bit of snow. You'll see our forecasted snowfall graphic to the right there, showing a foot or possibly more in this Friday through Saturday time frame. At this same time, the valleys will not have transitioned over, so we're for the most part expecting to see rain in the lower valleys. And I would say at this point our confidence for this first phase and as far as heavy wet snow in the mountains goes is pretty high. Another concern we have in this, especially Friday night into Saturday time frame, is for strong winds developing. And it looks like the peak of those winds is probably going to occur across northwest Montana. So areas like Kalispell, Flathead Valley, Bad Rock Canyon, over Flathead Lake. We'll see wind gusts 50 miles per hour developing as this front moves in from Canada. And I would say our confidence in seeing those gusts that strong is pretty high, with potential that we could even see some stronger wind gusts in a few localized areas. So with that, we have quite a bit of concern with those winds to see some tree and power line damage. We're also concerned about dock and boat damage on Flathead Lake. These kind of systems historically that have moved in the fall have produced some rather large waves on the lake. So that's a big concern of ours. And then also in the blowing or in the higher terrain, blowing and drifting snow and maybe even some blizzard type conditions on Marias Pass, especially Friday night into Saturday. So that's the first phase of the system. Then as we move into phase two, this is really what we're considering that Saturday night into Sunday time frame. And that's really when we're going to expect to see the valleys start to change over from rain to more of a heavy, wet snow. And so you'll see in the graphic here, for a lot of the valleys in western Montana, we're expecting several inches of snow. Now, the ground surfaces are pretty warm in the valleys, so accumulations on road surfaces, we're not as confident in how that's going to play out. Areas that see more intense snow could have some brief periods of accumulations on the roadways. But one thing that we'll be really concerned about in this time frame is that heavy wet snow on trees, potentially bringing down tree branches and causing some issues with power. So as we transition into the second phase, the heavy mountain snow is going to continue and it's going to expand further westward into even parts of Idaho. For those of you in Idaho, you'll notice we're not really expecting valley impacts for snow. Most of the valleys in Idaho should remain rain, but that higher terrain is going to see quite a bit of heavy, wet snow. So there's concerns there, especially for backcountry users. Our confidence in the valleys as far as snow amounts go is not quite as high just because it's going to be highly dependent on how quickly those snow levels drop and how quickly things turn over. But again, anywhere that does get this heavy wet snow in the valleys, that stress on trees could really be an issue. In the second phase, there will still be some wind that we're contending with, but it should overall be decreasing, especially as we go into Sunday. So the wind impacts start to taper off in the second phase, and the snow impacts really start to encompass a larger area. And then what we're considering phase 3 of the storm, this is Monday into Tuesday, and it's really about the cold. You'll see in the graphic there to the right, that's just kind of a representation of what our temperatures could be like in the mornings. There is potential for some spots to get colder, especially where there is some snow on the ground. So just bear that in mind, that it could actually be a little bit colder than what I'm showing here. But with these cold temperatures, we do have a couple concerns. The first being the potential for snow to melt on roadways and then possibly refreeze in these overnight time frames that could create some icy surfaces. There is also potential with this hard freeze that we're expecting to see some damage to irrigation lines. So just something to be aware of with that. And just going into early next week, we know that there's going to be a lot more people out and about in the mornings, particularly kids heading out to school and such. So this is a very large change from what we've been seeing, and maybe something people wouldn't be quite prepared for. So this is a look at past events that had similar meteorology to the one that's coming in here going into this weekend. And this just gives you a little historical context as far as what kind of conditions we've seen. So a few years I'll point out, back in 1934 we had a similar storm, and you can see some fairly hefty snowfall amounts. 8 inches of snow fell in Phillipsburg. Seeley Lake had 4.5 inches. Butte 3 inches, actually 1.5 inches here in Missoula. So that just kind of gives you a feel for what similar events have created as far as snow goes. Another thing to point out, in 1970 and then again in 2000, similar conditions led to 6 to 10 foot high waves on Flathead Lake. They were seeing winds in excess of 60 miles per hour, so there was quite a bit of boat and dock damage. And then also that event in 1970, some tree and power line issues. So this is just to give a little historical context as far as what could occur. This doesn't necessarily mean these exact conditions will occur with this particular storm, but it gives us a little feel for what some of the potential could be. So here's just a little summary of some of our concerns. A big one is this is very abnormal for this time of year. We know there's still a lot of people out in the backcountry. We know hunting, things like that is going on. And so this is going to be leading to some dangerous backcountry conditions, and we're concerned that people may not be prepared for these kind of conditions given the time of year. Then another concern I already addressed a little bit was the potential damage to trees and power lines. One, from that initial surge of wind as that moves in, but then also just with that heavy wet snow on trees that still have their leaves that could really stress branches and such. There will be some travel impacts, particularly over those mountain passes along the Continental Divide. Highway 2 Marias Pass is one that we're particularly concerned with. And then out of the cold, the potential damage to irrigation with the hard freeze. And also this is going to be a difficult period for livestock in the area with that transition from a cold rain to snow and wind. We know that can lead to very difficult conditions for livestock. So that's just a little summary of what we're expecting. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we'll keep continuing to keep you guys up to date.